Washington needs a few commits from the May 30th weekend.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Just a quick reminder to all the everydayers, no matter where you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button. Click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new video. If you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review as well, as it does help us out a lot. And we're on all forms of social media with a whole bunch of fun off-season content coming at you. That's Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Locked On Huskies. But more on that later, because Lars, we got a really fun show that we're going to get to today where we're going to spend some time. We talked about what Washington's floor might be a few weeks ago. Today, we're going to dive into what Washington's ceiling might be. 9-3, 10-2, higher. We'll get into that. Also, 4-star quarterback Derek Zammit, he secured his spot in the Elite 11 final. Got a lot on that we're going to get to in a little bit. But Lars, we were going through Washington's first weekend of official visits last year, what that looked like. And we looked at who's coming in this year, especially after Vance Spafford was added to the docket, Madden Williams, Gavin Day, a couple guys other officially added to that docket over on 247 Sports. And we said, you need at least 4 or 5 commits from this weekend.
And it really does set up where the amount of guys coming in, like Derek Coleman, Bruce, CJ Lavender, you already have a number of commits coming in. Also, Derek Zammit, as we'll talk about in the next segment, will be coming up for his official visit on May 30th as well. He's going to report that here. But that, and I think that's the key where that one is a very quiet one, but when you have the quarterback is similar with Dash Byerly coming in last year with Chris Lawson, John Mills, all those guys, you look at it and think that's how you close, where there's a number of guys coming up, but it's not an overwhelming amount. Obviously, we don't think Anthony Jones is coming up, so you take him off the list. And it's not a case where last year it seemed like they went for volume and we're just going to almost kind of what they did for the junior day. We're like, hey, we're going to try and take as many shots as possible. And it really didn't work out, where now you're bringing Madden Williams up for another visit. This isn't official, but he's been up multiple times already. Same thing with Vance Spafford. You go down the list, and this is when we talk about the word close. This is when you finally have to close, getting the quarterback commit that you have, to come out for that weekend with Derek Coleman Brusa. So you're talking about the Derek duo. I think that's a big sell as well. And when we talk about guys wanting to play with elite talent, this is what that weekend is about.
So I really like where you're going with that, because we look at that 2025 first visit weekend. You talk about taking big swings where, Dijon Lee, Madden Faraimo, Matai Tagovai, Smith Orogbo, Andrew Marsh, those were all guys who were part of that weekend last year. And we sat here as, oh yeah, it's really nice to see Jedd go after these high-end guys and take those swings. Last year, those swings didn't really pay off. Of the top 10 players in terms of just the 247 rankings that came on a visit for that first big weekend of visits, 2 of them committed. And I look at that this year, and I'm not looking at it, the top 10, a couple of those guys are already committed to Washington, Derek Coleman Brusa being one of them. But I look at it and I say, I don't think you're flipping Vance Spafford on May 30th or over that weekend if that happens. But if you're able to get some momentum going in the right direction, and I look at that and I say, if Brian Bonner were to pull the trigger between now and then, I feel like that would really help this as well. But I just look at it and I say, if you're able to maybe pull off a Madden Williams sort of flip over that weekend, or just get a couple of these other guys in the boat, Derek Johnson being one, there are a couple other guys that just really stand out to me in terms of, I feel like they might be a little closer to popping. Some of them haven't been officially listed yet, so I'm not going to go down that road at this moment. But I look at that weekend from where they are right now compared to where this team was 12 months ago. And I say, you are, as you said, in a much better spot to land some of this high-end talent, because you think about it, and with the top 3 commits in this class, right? Yeah, Cody Green, Derek Coleman Brusa, and Derek Zammit. That's a really nice top end to where your class is right now. And, you and I have talked about getting some of those guys in the boat, how it will attract more elite talent around them. I say you have an opportunity, especially with Derek coming for his official that weekend, Derek Coleman Brusa, that is, where when 2 Dereks, that threw me for a loop there for a second. But I look at where you are right now in terms of momentum on the recruiting trail, and you need to capitalize on this weekend.
Absolutely. And I mean, Gavin Day is kind of another example where guys that are either trending in Washington, you're kind of rising on their interest list, or guys you've had on campus multiple times. The only thing that I'm not saying I push back on, but I think you have to at least get one of the receivers to commit that weekend, whether it's Spafford or whether it's Madden Williams. And we've seen UW pull off a flip with Cody Green from Oregon. So that the staff has the ability to do it. That's why you're bringing these guys up all in the same weekend, because it's about having that sell in so many words, where you're getting everybody around him. And maybe David Schwartzel commits as well, where a guy that has been on campus numerous times, a guy that, it's like, hey, are you going to Notre Dame? Are you taking an official out there or not? And so you look at that and think, if you can keep him home, maybe you start trending for FSCLA and, Derek Johnson at cornerback, maybe you round that out a little bit. There's so many things where if you get, like you said, 4 or 5, if you're able to get Gavin Day and Derek Johnson and a couple of offensive guys, like that's all you need. And then still be in contention to finish that out with a Brian Bonner, who is not coming up, but is, I would, again, we'll say it until it happens. Would be surprised if he doesn't end up in Washington, just a matter of when. But with that being said, like all the momentum is trending in Washington's favor, but you still have to finish the job, which we've seen them do this class. And this is kind of that weekend where now prove it one more time before you get into the month of June.
So there's one guy who I really wanted to highlight, and that's Dominic Harris, where he was at, as we record this on Sunday, May 18th, he was at Auburn this past weekend. And that's one of those guys where, you just kind of read the tea leaves from what some of the national guys, because we haven't gotten a chance to talk to him, but what, some of the Greg Biggins of the world are saying, and it sounds like it's Auburn or Washington for him. And now if you're able to, obviously he doesn't commit between now and then, but he gets on campus and you're able to really sell him over that weekend. I think if the offensive line class is in a really good spot, that's going to do a lot to round this class out, where, we look at it and there's Dominic Harris, there's Aaron Thomas that are still out there as true tackles. I think Sam Utu ends up on the interior at some point in time. And I know he's got a couple other visits coming up as well. But I look at Dominic Harris as the one guy who may be closer to pulling the trigger, in my opinion. And I look at, as he continues to rack up offers, where Oregon offered him a couple days ago. I feel like North Carolina or somebody else did as well over the last week or so. And it's at the point where he's almost at 30 offers. And Washington was number 1 for him. And they did a really good job establishing that relationship with Brendan Carroll. Michael Switzer has done a fantastic job picking up where he left off. And that's the one guy that I really look at from this weekend, where he's not the highest rated dude on the list. But that doesn't matter, because I look at that frame at 6'8", 350, and I say, if you can get that guy to commit right now, your offensive line class is in a fantastic spot.
And it's a winnable battle for Washington, because if I just asked you point blank, do you think Washington could win head-to-head in the recruiting battle with Auburn?
Yes.
Yes, sir. And I think that's why now we get Alabama, Georgia. Those are the ones we've still yet Tennessee. We've still yet to see come to fruition truly. But there's, again, if you can knock off Auburn and you just start checking more boxes and you get a Mississippi State done, the more positive momentum you can gain on the trail, the better. And when you're talking about 2 Vegas guys with Gavin Day and Dominic Harris, where Washington's been pretty good going into Las Vegas and finding a way to get guys out, those are 2 prime examples of guys where there's no, again, Gavin Day will be harder, but if you can pull up one or both of those guys, that is a massive win going out of that weekend.
Lars, another massive win came from 4-star quarterback Derek Zammit, who's going to the Elite 11 final. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. So, Lars, I'm going to give you the floor here because we've got a little bit of news regarding Derek Zammit, who made the Elite 11 finals, has set his official visit, and I'm just going to hand it right over to you.
Yeah, so his, I talked to his dad on, I think it was Friday or Saturday, whatever day that was, and got some background on him, and he mentioned, hey, Derek's going up to the Elite 11 in New Jersey, or I think Penn State. And again, by the way,
Penn State, yeah, that's right.
And shout out to that drive, because that drive to Penn State is beautiful, especially in the springtime and early summer. But the more you watch Derek, the more you go into his film and just dive into who he is as a person. Zero surprise that he won the Elite 11 at Penn State and will be going on to the Elite 11 finals, because kind of been like something that he's worked for his entire life, where he started playing football at 4 years old. Think about that. It's almost hard to wrap my head around, but it's just a guy where you look at all the tools that he possesses, that, what we talked about when he committed. It's a perfect fit in Jedd's scheme, the ability to run, the ability to move and make plays off structure and still find the flick of the wrist to get the ball down deep. And I think we don't really get to see Washington have a ton of guys go to Elite 11. We had, Jacob Sermon a while back. I think Jake Browning was there a while back.
Bill Morris went too. Sam Hewitt did as well.
But it's all the irony there. But no slight to Sam, but just like how interesting who goes and who doesn't. But especially with Jedd, when Dash didn't go last year and Tristan didn't go last year. That's not to say either of them aren't good, but just having that representation in these showcase events, that's always a positive for the Washington brand, because what does it do? Derek can start recruiting there. And I think, like we talked about in the last segment, why would you have him come up with the Derek and the other receivers coming up and the offensive linemen coming up? Well, clearly there's a targeted intent there. And so if you're Derek Zammit, you can look at the Elite 11 opportunity as another chance to recruit after you already go on your official visit. And so I'm really intrigued to see how he ends up at the finals in terms of how he performs. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's easily in the top 5 at the end of the day.
So I love this, because it's one of those things where, we were firmly in the camp of, hey, it sounds like Brady Smigel's coming to Washington. That didn't happen for multiple reasons, which we've dove into a little bit. But as we continue to watch Derek, it's one of those things where that's a really tough region to go into and win that finalist ticket, that spot. And his skill set just fits this offense so well. And it is really nice to bring him up on a weekend where, Van Spafford's coming for his official visit, Madden Williams, and you get an opportunity to let those guys get to know each other, because Derek was one of those guys who wasn't here for the junior day, where he was just such a late riser in terms of where it's felt like he was in terms of Washington's recruitment of him. And I look at his skill set. You hit the nail on the head when you talk about the mobility, the athleticism, the arm talent. And it's all there. And it's one of those things where, as we continue to watch him grow, you watch the junior film and then you watch him grow just as we see it throughout his senior season. I really love where his potential is, but there are so many different parts of that where I look at it and I say, man, I love this fit in terms of just the offense as a whole.
It really is a natural fit where, again, we both were kind of high on Brady for different reasons. And I honestly think, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, the location where he's all the way out in New Jersey. We just don't think, we even talked about it on the show where they offered him last August, I think. And we like, okay, interesting. They're offering, but they offered Malachi Goodman, an offensive tackle that, never, came to fruition, even took a visit to Washington. And so you look at all those offers that went out, it's like, okay, good offer, good quarterback, but what are the odds you're pulling a kid from New Jersey? Well, then you remember Jedd's New Jersey connection, being from the state. And the other thing that worth noting, as you touched on, is the level of competition that I kind of came to realize that is in the state of New Jersey when it comes to who Derek is going against week in, week out. That is the league competition. That is some of the best high school football in the country, where usually you think Texas, maybe Florida, but New Jersey is right up there, especially the private Catholic schools. And Derek's been a guy where, sophomore year to junior year, he took that jump. I believe was the only freshman to from the state of New Jersey to play or lead and win a state championship at any level in New Jersey. That's the fact that he's a trendsetter in that way, I think is, kind of Jedd saying, you know what? Yeah, Brady's the big arm, the this, the that, almost like when Danny Sprinkle was like, yeah, you're trading Luka, generational talent, all that. This and that. It's a better fit. And it's no slight to Brady, and it's not like saying Derek's better than Brady, but it's just for what Jedd needs to do with this offense. When we saw with Will Rogers, you need that mobile threat. You need that guy who can easily move in the pocket without having to just, kind of know more often than not you might be taking a sack or might be, certainly not gaining as much on the ground.
So it's one of those things where you talk about his improvement from sophomore to junior year. The mobility was one of those big ones where he ran for, I want to say it was 600 yards during his junior season. And that's one of those things where I just continue to think about his fit in this offense. And one of the things that you're able to do on these official visits is get these guys to work out together a little bit and just, you go through your tests and you do all these different things anyway. And I think it's one of these things where if you really want to sell Vance Spafford, I'm flipping from Georgia, or Madden Williams, I'm flipping from Texas A&M. You look at it and you say, all right, here's our quarterback. Here's who we have coming in. And it's just really nice to sell them where just to bring it back to May 30th weekend, I look at who's coming up that weekend versus who's coming up on June 20th. It's great that you have Cody Green coming in then. And, the number one target, I think overall right now being Kari Wilder is I look at that and I say, yeah, you're going to do a little bit of a different thing with those guys because Hanson Sanoa is coming up that weekend. A couple of names like, Landon Myrie. But this weekend I look at it and I say, you really want to sell these guys on why it's Washington and what Jedd's offense does so well, what we're really looking forward to seeing Damon Williams do. And it's all right. Well, this is the guy who we really feel like, for this class, at least, is the one who can carry on that tradition. When we look at, Dash and Tristan Keeney McMillan in the 2025 class, and, they fit this boat as well. But with Derek just getting that Elite 11 invitation and seeing this is a really fun quarterback class, just in terms of throughout the country, what kind of talent there is, and seeing what kind of representation he's going to bring to the table for Washington is an exciting thought.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting, I believe Derek Zammit was in the room when Derek Coleman Bruce committed, so he's also a good luck charm in that sense, where if you're able to get him around, again, now we both had kind of assumed that Derek was more likely than not going to end up at Washington the longer that recruitment went out, but it's still, worth noting where you're coming all the way out from New Jersey, you're making the effort, and I think that kind of resonates with other players, where if you're Madden Williams, well, you're staying on the West Coast or you're going to Texas, because he's committed to Texas A&M at this point in time. Those relationships getting built, where we talked about, the John Mills flip last year, where there was other factors why he flipped, obviously, but at least some of that was again, maybe not even a big part, just a decent sized small part was rooted in getting to bond with Dash, getting to bond with Chris Lawson, some of the other guys, and you didn't see it as much come to fruition from that weekend, but this one really does seem like it's shaping up at least to be a better return on investment than what you had last season.
So sorry, I when you said that, something just hit me, because when we had Dash on this podcast last summer, we had Devin Hyde tell a story about the mind time activities that they did where everybody was paired up and talking about goals and everything. And Dash told us that he was paired with Andrew Marsh for a lot of those activities and just a lot of different things they did because they wanted to just continue to hammer that point home of, hey, this would be your quarterback if you end up at Washington. We're going to see something like that with one of Vance Spafford or Madden Williams at the end of the month now. And that's just one of the really interesting things. It's, I don't want to, give Jedd all the credit for this because we can't act like that's a unique strategy in any way, shape, or form. And I mean, no disrespect by that, but it's one of those things where I look at the ability to be able to do that where, when we think about when it felt like Brady was going to be that quarterback coming up on that June 20th weekend, maybe you're able to find different ways to make that work if that were the case. But, I just look at some of these other visit schedules and it just feels like this is such a critical opportunity where I really don't believe that you can be able to persuade everybody to not take their other official visits. But bringing in your quarterback is going to be so critical for that. And this Elite 11 invitation is just another notch in his belt where it's, I'm not just doing this. I'm not just, a 4-star quarterback. I'm not just a state champion from New Jersey. It's, I'm also, going to go represent Washington among the best quarterbacks in the country.
I can already hear Jedd talking in December when Derek signs, and he's just like, this and this, and they just kind of, as Jedd does, as we love when Jedd just literally lists the entire bio when you ask about somebody, which again, respect to him for that.
That's right.
But again, it's almost a testament to the evaluation of Jedd, where you're looking at it and saying, hey, I'd rather go all the way out to the East Coast than try and settle for somebody on the West Coast because Jedd could easily just stayed on the West Coast and found somebody in Arizona or California and just settled with it and tried to make that sell. But I think it's about the fact that he went out and got his guy, and now his guy is performing even before his senior season. That's kind of already vindication for Jedd if you think about it.
Oh, I like where you're going with that, but Lars, we got to ask the question, what is Washington's ceiling in 2025? So let's make one thing clear right now. These are not our official record predictions. We're going to do those later on. We're going to do a full show about that. And it's going to be really fun. But I look at this and I say, I really like what Washington has done over the course of the offseason. I know there are people that have questions about the offensive line, there are people that have questions about a whole bunch of things, and they're totally fair. And I think we're gonna get into fall camp, and we're going to see improvement in several areas. But I look at where this team is right now, and I look at the schedule where FanDuel's got the over-under for Washington's win total set at 7.5. And I'm hammering that over, first of all. Shout out to our friends over at FanDuel. But I look at it and I say, if this schedule, you get a couple of bounces that you didn't get last season, where there's that one ESPN metric where they were one of like the 5 unluckiest teams in the country last season. And a lot of that was self-inflicted. So I don't know if you want to call it luck. But I look at it and I say, if just those unfortunate events even out this year, you're not 6-6 at the end of the regular season last year. You're 8-4. And I think this team is being talked about in a completely different light if you are 8-4. And so I'm looking at that and I'm saying, with what the offensive line was last season and, what a whole bunch of other things were down the stretch, like the run defense, if you were still this close to being 8-4 with all those things, if you're able to take a stride in the front seven, like we expect them to, take a stride along the offensive line, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that this team could end up at probably 10-2.
I agree. And I think we can unpack the schedule at least a little bit. Again, it's not the official record prediction, but you're talking about, you're probably going 2-0 to start off against Colorado State and UC Davis. Probably, again, let's just call those 2 easy chalk wins. When was the last time Washington lost to Washington State in back-to-back years? I
don't know.
So you would think the odds of that happening again, even going into Pullman again, you have Jimmy Rogers over there. They got as you found out, they got a much different system going on over there. And so you would think that should also be a win, especially with Damon, Jedd being in his second year. There's more talent on Washington's roster than there is on WashU's roster. That's just a fact of day. So you think you should go out of the non-conference schedule at 3-0. Now you're already better than you were last year. Then you get the real test again with Ohio State. But you look at the way this sets up, there is enough momentum there to where whether you beat Ohio State or not, as long as you're competitive, you might, be in that top 25 discussion going into the month of October, depending on how the chips fall.
So I like where you're going with that. And I want to get this out there now. I look at that Ohio State roster and I say they're going to have the 2 best players on the field. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about that in Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs. But I look at all of the talent they lost from last year's national championship team, and I think there's an opportunity here where I just look at it and I say, it's very logical to think that Ohio State can come in here into Husky Stadium and win that game. But I think it's just as reasonable for Husky Stadium to do Husky Stadium things where we saw, a very different, much stronger and more experienced Ohio State team struggle at Autzen Stadium last year. And I think that there's an opportunity for that to happen this year. I think there are a couple of matchups, Takario Davis versus Jeremiah Smith being the one that I've liked to, focus on. But I say Julian Sands, first real test, assuming that he's going to be the starting quarterback. He's very talented. I don't want to take that away from him. But I just say that there are certainly opportunities there for Washington to come out of that game with a victory. And, this is, we're the Husky show. Of course, we're going to say that, right? But I look at it and I say there is an opportunity there. Just like the week after that, you go to Maryland. That's going to be a really long trip. And we need to, it has to be said, Jedd Fisch, and, he's going to Wazoo as well. So under, our assumption here, Jedd Fisch has already won his first road game as a member of, as Washington's head coach. That has not happened yet. And that's going to be a long trip. And it's going to be really difficult to pull off a win. I don't know how good that team is going to be, but we saw Washington struggle a little bit with those cross-country flights last year. And there are still just questions to be had, but I just look at the talent level that Washington is bringing this year versus last year and what Maryland's bringing to the table. There is a legitimate path to starting the season 5-0.
Absolutely. And the other side of the equation is the Ohio State game. Really, the more and more you look at it and as closer as we get to it, you're going to hear the Michigan comparison last year where coming off a national championship, roster looks a little bit different. You still have some pieces like Michigan had Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. There was enough to say, hey, it's national championship rematch. But we all knew that was not a national championship rematch. Alex Orji is not J.J. McCarthy, even though my opinion of J.J. McCarthy is what it is. He's still not anywhere close to J.J. So this is in that similar mold where obviously Julian Sands is better than any Michigan quarterback last year on their roster. But it's a very winnable game. And then you talk about the one for me is you have to win one of the Michigan, Wisconsin road trips. I think you can live with not going to, not winning both, because I think of those two, I don't know why, but I think they beat Wisconsin. I think they might lose to Michigan. It's again, this is what's going to be the interesting test about the Big Ten as we talk about the ceiling. We talked about the floor being kind of 7-5, 8-4 in that mold, just for reference, just to, for people wondering what the ceiling is going to be. But when we say 10-2 is the ceiling, it's because it's going to be those 3 or 4 games, which means those 5 or 6 plays, the Vincent Holmes play last year at Rutgers, Grady Gross missing a few kicks that he didn't miss all the entire last season. And when he did, it was rare. You kind of forgot about it. But all those things kind of worked against them. The fortune, in a way, wasn't on their side. It wasn't luck. It was fortune. I think that's more the appropriate word there. Now Jedd's focused on, kind of making improvements. You got the Ryan Walters scheme. You would think, Big Ten coordinator, those type of things, continuity on the offensive staff. There shouldn't be any type of regression because we haven't seen that in spring.
So I agree with you there. I think the biggest thing for me is, you talk about how hard it is to win on the road in this conference and how hard it will be to win at Michigan and win at Wisconsin. And I think about what Washington really didn't have last season and what is going to define this entire season. I really don't believe it's the offensive line. I think that that's obviously critical for a lot of reasons. I'm not trying to, undermine like that in any way, shape, or form. But it's the defense. It's the defensive line. It's that front seven, because that was the biggest problem last year when you couldn't get a stop against Indiana in that game. You had opportunities to get back into that game, and you didn't in that second half because you didn't have a front seven that was capable of making a stop on 3rd and 4. And you knew that they were going to line the ball up in that second half, run it downhill, and they were going to pick up a first down because you did not have that depth up front. And that is the biggest thing, and that you and I have discussed throughout spring practice was, whoa, this defensive line, it's not just bigger and stronger and more experienced, but it's way deeper than it ever was at any point last season. And that's the biggest thing where, we talk about it where, let's say they are able to find a way to beat Michigan in the Big House, because that's going to be difficult. I have my doubts about what they're going to be with a true freshman quarterback who has never thrown a pass at the college level. But I look at that and I say, if they can play good defense in the front seven, if that defensive line really does come to play in a way that it, especially down the stretch last season, did not, you are looking at a team that is ready to take a big step forward.
Exactly. And I think it's why you made all, the changes that you did. We ran through. It's Jedd, when the Penn State game, the Oregon game, we all knew what Jedd was going to say. This offseason, we really, really need to address the trenches. And every now and then you're thinking, okay, hey, we addressed them. We got a couple of guys, plus some freshmen are going to be emerging. No, Jedd emptied the cupboard in a sense where you got Simone Peppa, Tai, Ontario Thompson, the list goes on, plus some of the younger guys that will be emerging, and then a healthy Armand Parker, whenever J-Bron comes back, that's just a bonus. And you look at all of those pieces, it's there's no reason why you can't put it together. But it's going to be a matter of, can you put it together on the fly early enough? Or because if you, somehow I just don't envision them stumbling and going, 2-1 or even, God forbid 1-2. So the more momentum you can build, and I don't see them getting blown up by Ohio State. That game doesn't strike me as there's no game on this schedule that strikes me as that might be a boat race against Washington. And so I think that's why you go and hire Ryan Walters to implement his defense, where the 5 down front, as again, Ryan will die on that hill. It's not just a 5 down front. We understand that, but it's the versatility. It's the options that you have to match up week in and week out. Whereas Steve, all I can tell you is that 3rd and 20 at Lumen Field was still criminal. So you look at the growth that you've had on the staff. Jedd, the only thing that we don't know if he can answer, did some of those red zone play calls improve? I would imagine he's going to do that. JP Lossman, I know, is kind of involved in some of those offseason projects as well. So you would think another former NFL quarterback helping in the room, that would help them on in the offense. So I think just everything is trending in the right direction. You just have to almost like in the recruiting room, you just have to capitalize.
So You just mentioned the thing that we did legitimately try to just hold on to this for the end, because there are so many other reasons why we believe that Washington can achieve this ceiling of 10-2 and be, a potential playoff contender. Because if you're at that record in the Big Ten, there's no way you're not top 5 or whatever it might be. But we wanted to save this Damon Williams talk because we've spent a lot of time discussing him throughout this offseason, because he really is the biggest reason why your ceiling is so much higher. Where you just look at the fit in the offense, what he can be with Jonah Coleman, Adam Muhammad next to him, with Denzel Boston, Omari Evans, Rasheed Williams, whoever else on the outside. And you have all the talent you need at those skill positions for Damon to take a big step forward. Because every time Jedd has a microphone in his face, he's going to say something about that. And it's completely fair, because that is the most important position in sports. To have a good quarterback, that just makes everything else so much better. And I look at what Damon could be, and it's, we're not going to sit here and say he's going to, be a top 5 finalist for the Heisman Trophy. Jedd will, and that's totally fine. We know he has that kind of potential. We're just not going to sit here and say that right now. But I look at that and I say, if you are able to take that big step forward, if he's able to take that big step forward, everybody else is going to follow suit. And it's why, I talk about Julian Sayet. And I say, I have my doubts about where he is right now. I don't have those doubts about Damon nearly as much, because we saw him take those meaningful reps last year. We saw him, in the second half of blowouts where, you mentioned we don't really see any blowouts right now on this schedule. We certainly could feel that Penn State one coming. But it's one of those things where it's important to get him reps in that game. We saw what happened against Oregon, but to get him that start and get him all those reps in that game, the second half against UCLA, and then the Sun Bowl as well, where having all of that under his belt is going to do nothing but help propel him forward this year.
It's why when you made the decision to play him in every single game last season, when I predicted it would be over 4 or over 5, he would burn his red shirt, but I didn't think it would be all 12 or 13. That had to be the plan. You had to do it with a 2-year, 3-year vision in mind. You're not doing that and then having an open competition. It has been very clear this is Damon's team. Damon's got the deed to the house. And I think there's no reason to think why Damon wouldn't take another step, just because of how well he handled his freshman season.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of you dares for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.